Mini modular moments.
Hello and welcome to another mini modular moment. You may recall from the last episode that I threw some modules into this small case with the intention of getting to know them a bit better. In particular, I wanted to get my head around Mutable Instruments Beads, which is notoriously difficult to understand. Well, it is for me anyway. In the last episode, I did throw a patch together and go, oh, it's sounding great, not realising that Beads wasn't actually doing anything apart from putting a bit of reverb on, because I've learned since then that the density knob, which is this big one at the top, when that's set to 12 o'clock, Beads isn't generating anything. So yeah, I was thinking it's sounding great, but it wasn't Beads that was sounding great, it was rings with a bit of reverb from Beads. Well, you live and learn. So I spent a couple of weeks watching a couple of tutorials, reading the manual, at the same time just having a go with it, because I did read somewhere that the amount of time that you spend reading a manual or watching a tutorial, you should spend an equal amount of time at least actually playing with that module and trying to figure out things for yourself and listen to it and seeing what happens. And I found that has actually really helped. And so I have got to grips with it to some extent. There's still a lot to learn, but I can make a noise out of it. In fact, it's making this lovely generative patch as we speak. So let's have a look at this in a bit more detail and I'll tell you what I've learnt so far. So Beads is a texture synthesizer. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but my understanding of how it works is this. I've currently got a random sequence coming from the Turing machine into rings, and the audio from rings is going into Beads. Beads is recording that audio at regular intervals and replaying it, and you can change how that is replayed through the various knobs. So for example, the density knob, which is where it doesn't play back anything at 12 o'clock, at the moment it's constantly replaying the audio because it's fully counterclockwise. If I move it, and it's the best way to demonstrate just by listening to it, you can actually hear that audio is a bit more fragmented. You can also change the size of the audio recording that's going through. So at the moment, we've got it, I don't know how long, but we've got it at a certain length, but you can make it really small. So you can hear those little blips. And if I turn this knob, this is the dry wet knob. So this is the sound of rings without Beads, but with a bit of reverb from Beads, but nothing else. And then fully wet, that's what Beads is doing. So you can hear those blips from that small size now. So it records a certain length of audio, and you can take a fragment of that, which is depending on the size that you're choosing, and the time knob will allow you to choose which fragment you take from the recorded element. It's a bit confusing. I've still not 100% got my head around it. I can kind of get it. It's very hard to explain. The shape knob shapes that sound, so it's a bit like an envelope in how you want to shape it, but mine's very fluid at the moment because I've got this density on full, so it's all wishy-washy and sounding great. As I've mentioned before, we've got reverb, so if I turn the reverb off, this is everything without the reverb, and then we'll add it on again. And then this knob, it took me a while to work this one out. This is the feedback knob, so this basically takes your recording and feeds it back in as it keeps recording, like a bit of a feedback loop. I couldn't quite get it, but I can kind of understand it when I take it off this. You leave it a minute, it's very different from when the feedback's on. So hopefully that gives you some idea of what that does. But it is a case of just messing around with it and seeing what sounds good. There's these knobs here which are attenuators if you've got any patches into here, but they're also randomizers, and I'm not going to go into this in this video because it's really complicated, but it adds a bit of crazy randomness to your sound, and it's just worth a twiddle and seeing what sounds right. So there in a nutshell is my very small introduction to beads. As I said, I've still got a lot to learn, and there's a lot of good resources out there, but that's where I've got to so far. And the key things I've learned is, if you want to hear something from beads, don't have your density knob on 12 o'clock because it's not going to work. And also make sure this dry wet knob is not fully counterclockwise, because if it is, you're not going to get any of the beads goodness coming through. That only comes through once you move it into semi-wet or fully wet. There you go. One other quick thing to mention is that this knob here changes the quality of the recording that's being looping through, with white being the cleanest, and then you kind of gradually getting more lo-fi as you move down the colours. But it's just worth experimenting and listening to what it sounds like. It's the best way to learn. And also, keeping it in a small system until you've fully learnt it is a really good way. I'm learning my modules so much better now by being forced into spending hours looking at them. So I'll go away and see what else I can do with beads, and maybe one day I'll come back with another mini modular moment on this specific module.